Well, then we've just seen the Swiss Guard, we've seen the military walking out, we've seen all the bells. But Jonathan, I think one of the key questions right now is why the new Pope, this new American Pope, would have picked the name Leo XIV. What sort of significance does that carry with it?
I'm sure in the coming days or weeks, months, he will explain that himself, but we can make some pretty good educated guesses. Go back to Leo XIII. He was a pope who lived from 1810 to 1903, had a very long pontificate, and is often referred to as the social pope or the pope of the worker. He had a very influential role in developing what we call the social doctrine of the church. Those who are very involved in Catholic things and social doctrine teaching will know the very famous Rerum Novarum encyclical letter that he wrote. And so you could say he's going to be very involved and have very strong opinions of how the church should relate to society. And what it means to defend the dignity of every human being. Now, he also came out in a much more traditional dress than Pope Francis did. So you have on the one hand, he's taken the name of Leo XIV. In other words, most likely he took that to continue in the steps of Leo XIII. But he had a more traditional dress, and I'm very surprised that he didn't say anything in English, and I'm sure he's sending a message as well. You cardinal electors may have chosen American, and you have broken with the traditional wisdom that you can't have so much power in the United States of America in the political realm and also have an American Pope. But he's saying to the cardinal electors and to the world, I am a universal spiritual leader. I am not only an American.
Yeah, and I think that's such an interesting point. You know, so many people had said in the lead up to this election, the lead up and being picked, that it would never be an American Pope, that was never possible. I think you said a few days ago to me that perhaps it could be, so you may have had an idea. But why? Why did that feel impossible? And what message does it send that the Cardinals are happy for it to be an American Pope?
I'm calling him Cardinal Prevost, but he's now Leo XIV. But Cardinal Prevost, as cardinal, leading the dicastery of bishops, was a very discreet, very practical, and a very wise man, based on what the cardinals have seen over the last 2 years that he's been leading this department for Pope Francis. He's also a good administrator, from everything we know, and the Vatican has very serious, not only financial issues, because they're relatively small compared to a large country, for example, but they have a lot of administrative issues. And you have to have backbone. You have to be able to say, I am the leader now. And he has done that as a missionary bishop, as a missionary priest, and he's done that leading a very important congregation or dicastery department in the Vatican.
Would it be fair to say, and we look at his record, that perhaps he is a bit more of a progressive pope? I mean, he seemed to back Pope Francis in terms of allowing divorced couples to have communion later on. He seemed to pull back a little bit from the support of LGBT, groups as well. But he thanked Pope Francis, in his speech. Would it be fair to say he is closer to the progressive side than conservative side?
Yeah, I'm not going to put a label on him yet. We'll have plenty of time to do that. The papacy has a way of changing you. You and I talked about this, Benjamin. By the way, you've done a fantastic job leading our coverage here. And you and I were talking off camera how the papacy has a way of changing a man. You're used to ministering to your own country, to your own people. You come with your own cultural and family backgrounds, but now you are the leader not of any specific country or even people that you've served in the past, but you are the leader of a universal church. We will see what Pope Leo XIV does in the coming weeks and months.
So what will we see over the next few days? Is there events coming up? Will we be getting speeches from the new Pope? Will there be events over the next few days? How does the beginning of a new Pope start?
Yeah, that's up to him.
Because it's absolute power in a sense, isn't it? I mean, a Pope doesn't have to listen to any of the constitutions before him. It really is one of the few roles in the world where it is whatever he wants. the church to be other than, the Bible and the sort of doctrine?
Yes, it's right. It's yes, yes, and yes, but with some caveats. He does not have the right, or even we would say the ability, to change the teachings of Jesus Christ. And the way in which the church has interpreted those teachings that we call sacred tradition, that has been passed down from one pope to the next over the centuries. But he does have universal authority over practical running of the church, and can have great influence in the development of doctrine. In other words, a development of the understanding of what Jesus has taught us and what the popes have passed on to us, to the church over the centuries.
When we look back at the run-up to this election as such, the choosing of this pope, was now Pope Leo XIV, is he someone who would have been wanted to be pope, who was proactive about being pope, who may have been lobbying to be pope, or was he perhaps not someone who might have been in that position?
Everything about his character, from what I know, would say no. The way that he behaved and took on his role as the prefect of the dicastery of bishops, he was a very quiet, presumably humble leader, but also a very strong leader. I read a story just the other day about a French bishop that met him for the first time and was so impressed by his very specific knowledge of what was going on in his diocese. He's known to be a good administrator.
Yeah. Well, look, we're going to be learning as much as we can about Pope Leo XIV. And John, we're going to throw it back to you. But what a scene that we have seen here today in Rome. We can hear it in the streets, the bells, the cheering, and I think that it is a surprise to everyone that we have the first ever American Pope, Pope Leo XIV. John?
Benji and Jonathan, thank you so much. Terrific work there in Vatican City.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.